Does it have to be like this? It was a question he seemed to be repeating over and over in his mind, yet this was the first time he spoke it aloud. Lightning crackled all around him and the 100 other soldiers behind him, their large armor glistening in colors of green and white. Though his companion was wearing her helmet, he could practically feel the roll of her eyes, the biting of her lip. She even balled up her fist, shaking it by her hip. Had she been planning for him to ask this? How many times had she played out the conversation? How many times had she already answered his unasked question? You already know the answer, Ezekiel. Yep, she was annoyed, every word grating from her lips like it pained her to speak. The higher-ups say jump and we ask how high. It's always been like that, and it always will be. So yes, it has to be like this. She relaxed her hand, placing it on the holster of the pistol she kept locked to her leg. This world had its chance and it fucked up. Wouldn't be the first time, and it won't be the last. There was a pause in her speech, a hesitation almost. Is this your first time? Her voice seemed to soften before she could get the complete thought out, as if she had already figured out the answer. When Ezekiel nodded, she shook her head. Jesus, they keep getting younger and younger. The ground was shaking beneath him at this point, the lightning much more intense. Just stick with me, all right? You'll be fine. Ezekiel turned away from her, reaching behind to grab at his own rifle. A chorus of snarls and growls erupted behind them, making him jump. The gluttons. They were getting quite anxious at this point. You could almost hear their stomachs rumbling. It made him sick to his stomach. Do you get used to it? Does it get any easier? A shout from the back, their signal to start moving. He still tried to keep her in his sights, finding her somewhat comforting. She turned her head ever so slightly, keeping up pace with him, doing her best not to be too slow for those behind them. Short answer? No, you never get used to it. I've done this, 6 times already? It still hurts like hell. You just have to find a way to block out what you can. This is a job. It's nothing personal. We get rid of the bad apples, so the rest of the tree can flourish, he finished, giving a nod. Walking through the green sea of mist was difficult, especially when you weren't the only one trying to squeeze through. Every step made his legs feel like lead, several soldiers behind them giving him a nudge, a suggestion to go faster. He tried his best, stumbling every now and then. It wasn't long before they reached the end of the road, a white light meeting them, splitting open and growing wider and wider until it filled their vision. There was a crackle of lightning that shook him to his very core as he reached what must have been the edge of the green road. Here they hovered over what looked like a town carved out of a forest. Candles began to light as nighttime sank into the world. It seemed peaceful, tranquil, and they were here to ruin it. Ezekiel and the woman were the first to jump off the edge, plummeting towards the ground like a bullet. Others followed, pouring out like a waterfall behind them, the giant gluttons the last to fall out. If anyone in town had noticed, no one said a thing. The impact was incredibly hard, the shock absorbers inside the armor doing just enough to keep him standing. He and the others seemed to land in the center of town, a few landing atop of roofs crashing into the houses below. So much for a quiet entrance. Screams filled the air and people began busting out of their homes, coming to a dead stop as they saw the army before them, none of the armored beings making a move just yet. An elderly man started to scream, a ray of light blowing his head clean off. Others began to run, their bodies soon riddled with burning holes, the smell of flesh cooking filling the air. Ezekiel hadn't fired a single shot, his hands trembling too much. "Come on," he could hear himself screaming. "You were trained for this." Gluttons were all around him, ripping at bodies on the ground, some beginning to tear at reality itself, chewing away the world like candy. A woman and child bumped into him, almost sending him to the ground. None moved away from the other. A standstill formed in the middle of such chaos. Here was his chance. He just had to raise his gun and ignore the look of terror in the young boy's eyes. He had a son at home, and a wife. Would he have wanted someone to kill his family on the streets like a rabid dog? No, but this was different, right? These people had fucked up, just like she had said. They had their chance. Their lives were being revoked. It was just that simple. Still, his hands trembled as he brought his rifle up, his ears filled with the sounds of the mother and child gasping. He just had to pull the trigger. Just once. Bam! They were both gone. sawn in half by a singular beam of light that didn't come from his gun. What remained of their bodies collapsed to the ground, their wounds already singed. He didn't even have to look up to see the attacker. It was her, the woman. He heard the click of her reloading her rifle, staring him down like he was little more than a pathetic child. "You stalled." "I couldn't help it." "That's cowardice, and that has no place here." She cleared the distance between them, knocking him to the ground. He tried to squirm his way back up, but she placed a boot against his chest, pinning him down as she aimed her rifle at his face. "Cowardice is a weakness, and all weaknesses need to be purged. You're supposed to be a sword, not the sword wielder. You don't ask questions. You don't ask for a motive. That's your fucking job." She applied more pressure to his chest, no one coming to his aid. "And swords that don't do their tasks aren't needed for a war." Bam! Blood covered her armor as she rid herself of Ezekiel, his torso ripped to shreds. His body moved about for a few moments longer before life vanished from his limbs. A buzz filled her ears before she pressed a button on the side of her helmet to answer the call. Yes. Yes, sir. The cleansing is starting off smoothly. This hunk of junk will be gone in no time flat." Sable, Episode 9, The End She Brought. There she stood right outside the Paragon building, feeling as excited as she ever had. She would have skipped here if she wasn't in uniform, or if she didn't have company behind her. She couldn't believe this was finally happening. Her dreams were coming true right before her very eyes. "Sable! Sable!" a man cried out from behind her, sounding out of breath. She turned to see her lovers, a man and a woman, rushing up behind her, doing their best to avoid plowing into anyone else in the square. Once they both met up with her, the man bent over, gripping his knees as he tried to catch his breath, both women just laughing at him. "You'd think being around us would have put him in shape," Sable's lover teased, moving strands of black hair from her face. "Especially you. You're always running here and there." "Oh, be nice to Joe, Esmeralda," Sable giggled. "It's not his fault you feed him like a horse." Joe stood dumbfounded, his mouth hanging open as he stared at his lovers. "You know what?" he began, clearing his throat. "I'm glad you're leaving for a few months, Sable. Maybe all that training will teach you some manners." "Won't change the fact that you're a big fatty." Both girls howled again, Joe's face turning a dark red as he grabbed for them, smothering them in his chest. They embraced for what seemed like hours, Sable being the first to escape. "I have to get going, guys. I'm already running late." She didn't move. Will you guys miss me?" She felt so stupid for asking it, but part of her needed to make sure. Knowing they'd be waiting for her would be the drive she needed to survive training. She just needed to hear those words. Esmeralda answered with a kiss. "Of course we will, Sable. What a silly question." She held Sable close. "You mean the world to us. I know for a fact I'll be worried sick until you come back home." Joe snuck up, scooping Sable in his arms and showering her in kisses. "Yeah, we'll be sitting by the door just waiting. I'm counting down the days as we speak." He placed her softly back onto the ground, Esmeralda coming in to run her fingers through Sable's jet black hair. "Now go on, my little crow," she whispered. "Make us both proud." A flash, and now Sable was standing in the armory, getting fitted for her new flight suit. She had dreamed about having one of these since she was a little girl, though she didn't realize until now just how hard it was to fit into this. The underlayers were made to be almost skin-tight, but skin-tight to the Paragons was 3 sizes too small. Then came the actual plates of armor that snapped onto the underlayer, keeping her trapped inside a tin can, essentially. Everything was so smooth and glistening in the light. She had asked for her nickname to be engraved onto the chest, gold letters spelling out Crow for everyone to see. "How does it feel?" Commander Hudson grumbled as he stood before her, barrel arms crossed over one another. "I feel like I'm a sausage, sir," she remarked, squirming in place. "Do they really have to make these things so tight?" All Hudson did was nod, leaving her to sigh. Well, how does it look anyway? Hudson moved about her, examining every inch of the suit before clapping his hands together. I think you look like you're ready for your first solo patrol. Sable made a sound, but he continued before she could speak. We're sending you to a relatively safe area. We just need you to look about, make sure the local den is secure, and then you can head back home. Easy as that. Just make sure you aren't caught by any of the locals, and you should be fine. Sable felt her heart skip inside her chest. Her first solo patrol? Everything was moving so fast she could barely hold on. It would be an honor, Commander Hudson. Thank you for the opportunity. Now she saluted, her heart still thumping inside. Thank me by succeeding, Crow. You have a lot of potential, and I think this will more than prove it to the Council that you're ready to play with the big kids. Are you ready? More than ready, sir, she blurted out. More than ready. Everything had gone wrong. Halfway through the jump, her suit had malfunctioned, nothing working to prevent her from free-falling thousands of feet in the air. She couldn't even scream anymore as she planted into the ground, her body rocking around inside the armor. The shock absorbers were the only thing that kept her alive, and even then she was just barely passing. Most, if not all, of her bones were broken, twisted in horrific fashions. Though she couldn't see it, she could feel her broken ribs piercing her flesh. It hurt to breathe. It hurt to think. Hell, even her eyes were filling with tears as the little light that poked through her helmet was too much. Her body squirmed about desperately, every motion hitting her with impossible pain that brought her to the point of passing out. She wanted Joe and Ezzy to take care of her, to hold her as she breathed her last bits of life, broken on foreign soil. She didn't even notice the 5 people moving to tower over her, all looking down at her with crooked smiles. Here she is, brothers and sisters. One spoke out, leaning down to grab her broken body. Here's our angel. Pain was the only thing she knew of for the next few months. Her suit had been ripped off of her, her wrecked form strapped down to a makeshift gurney. The people who had rescued her were cutting her open, running what looked to be experiments on her. She should have been dead, but they were using some sort of magic contraption connected to her heart to keep her alive despite what was being done to her. It started with the legs. The people, calling themselves elders of the forest, had begun to stretch her legs out to what would have been considered impossible lengths, whatever bone she had left in them shattering like glass. The thing attached to her heart would glow as bones shattered, not only repairing them, but morphing them to stretch out as long as the elders needed. The pain was overwhelming, Sable passing out once or twice during the process. Next came her arms and chest. She was being retrofitted, her limbs lengthening to monstrous proportions, fingers breaking and snapping together to create long, devilish talons. She couldn't even scream, her teeth being chipped and filed by hand until they were brought to jagged points that ripped at her lips and gums, leaving her with a chin covered in blood. 2 eyes were growing on the left side of her face, another product of the machine attached to her. It burned as 2 red orbs split through her skin, new cords wrapping themselves around her brain, giving her sight she never had before. All the people around her just laughed and muttered prayers in a language she couldn't understand. What were they doing to her? 4 days passed, her newly made body still groaning in pain. The elders hovered over her, holding something over her face. It was a mask. It looked like a skull of some creature, giant horns curling out from the top. Without a word, they lowered it onto Sable's face, the skull burning at her as it touched skin. They were grafting it to her. She kicked and squirmed, but to no avail. What was done was done. Soon, she found herself entering a world of black. She had passed out again. The last day of her transformation was the most painful. She was awoken suddenly to find that she was no longer trapped against the bed. She was standing up straight, though her feet wobbled to and fro as she tried to keep her balance. She was so tall, her upper back pressing against the ceiling of what must have been the elder's home. Neither of the 5 devils said anything as they led her outside, sitting her down on the soft mud. 3 moved back inside, looking for something. Their leader, a heavy-set man with a matted beard, glared at her with a suspicious smile. "Almost done, my little angel," he purred, his voice dripping with venom. "But we have to give you your wings first, right?" She couldn't answer. She could barely understand him. Everything burned. Her head was a drum thumping inside her skull with each passing moment. The others came back out into the opening, carrying between them a cauldron filled with burning black liquid. Tar. There was something else inside floating about the liquid mixture. Feathers? She scooted back on her ass, being soon stopped by the forgotten fourth, her fingers digging into Sable's skin. The three carrying the cauldron went to work, gloving their hands before reaching into the cauldron and pulling out blackened feathers. They pressed them against her skin, causing her to bellow in pain. She squirmed and bucked, but all was for naught. The red-hot liquid oozed over the rest of her form, singeing every inch of her that it could. The entire process took half the day, but it was soon completed. Most of her form had been covered up in tar and feathers, making her look like some bird-human hybrid. It was a miracle that she was still up, though it seemed like a nightmare to her. Two elders grabbed at her shoulders, lifting her up despite the pain in her legs. They kept her bent low enough so that their leader could look at her eye to eye. He said nothing as he reached into his trousers, pulling out a bright dagger that almost blinded her 4 eyes. He raised the knife ever higher as the praying grew more sporadic and desperate. There were howls in the evening sky as he slammed the blade into her skull, not stopping till his hilt was the only thing visible. Her body grew numb, the light escaping her eyes. There were many moments of silence afterwards, the elders just staring at Sable. "And who are you, servant?" the leader growled out, gripping Sable's face as the light began to return. I'm whoever you deem me to be," she whispered, the voice not entirely her own. "You shall be named Crow, my dear child," he replied, kissing her masked forehead. "And you shall be a guardian of this forest, and of us. That is your command." Crow awoke to the sound of drums. What was that? Was it dreaming again? Impossible. It couldn't remember the last time it had dreamed. The giant shifted about on the ground, looking about. How had it ended up back here? The woman in black. Crow shot up from the ground, though its body ached in protest. Where was she? Did she know what the drumming was all about? "Did you see it?" A soft, warm voice purred from behind Crow's shoulder. It turned to see who it was, shocked to find the woman in black sitting upon a stump behind Crow. Her skin was the color of space, her body dusted with starlight. In truth, she was the most beautiful creature Crow had ever seen in its rather long existence. Memories began flooding back, memories of this very woman carrying Crow out of the clearing before whatever was drumming found it. "Did I see what?" Crow wheezed, pain racking its entire form. Had it fallen? I dreamed. At least, I think it was a dream. I haven't dreamed in ages. I thought it was impossible." It was rambling at this point, its mind still processing everything. Why had that dream felt so real? The woman in black shook her head, long flowing hair dancing in the air. Not a dream, a memory. She stood up from the stump, clearing the distance between her and Crow. "Your memories. Memories of what you used to be, and those responsible for taking what made you away." She placed a hand on its chest, filling Crow with a warmth it had never felt. "You need to wake up, Sable. It's time for you to get back at those that have tormented you for so long." Sable. The name sounded familiar, leaving a bitter taste in Crow's mouth. The girl in its dream. Her name was Sable. Could that have been Crow? Its legs buckled, and Crow had to kneel on one knee, its mind racing. "What are you talking about?" it asked, feeling its body grow hot. The drumming was almost a symphony at this point, filling Crow's ears and shaking its very core. The woman in black moved about Crow, nodding. "Poor thing. They really did a number on you." The way she moved, it was like her entire body was made of water. "Those people in the cave, those people that sent you here, they're all responsible for what you are now. You've been lied to your entire life by those that think they hold all the power." Now she was kneeling beside Crow, their eyes meeting. "Even those who claim they loved you, all of them have betrayed you, betrayed this world. Now, I'm offering you a way to get back at them, to make them pay for all the pain they have and will cause." More memories flooded back. The people who loved Crow? Joe and Ezzy? The name sounded odd coming from its lips, yet there was a hint of familiarity to it. They'd never hurt me, Crow shifted about. They said they'd wait for me. A moment of silence was shared between them, the woman in black rolling her eyes, grabbing one of Crow's hands in her own. We don't really have time for this, Sable, but you need to see this for yourself. The air around them shifted, growing colder. Was the world fading around them? I need you to understand how much they've hurt you. Soon, they were standing in a city made of pure white, in a square that looked strangely familiar to Crow. Crow had been here before, though it couldn't remember when. Thousands of people rushed by them like they weren't there, some even passing through the two like ghosts. It wasn't long before the silent square was filled with the chorus of screams. Crow's screams. It looked all about before its eyes fell upon floating television screens that were filling the streets. They were playing clips that were all too familiar to Crow. They were showing it being tortured, being transformed into whatever the hell it was now. Crow, or what used to be Sable, screamed at the top of her lungs in the clip as her bones ripped and stretched, and the audience around the screen were erupting in laughter. Onlookers cheered and clapped hands as the poor girl on screen was morphed and twisted, left alone on a world she didn't understand, with no one coming to help her. Would you fucking look at her? A familiar voice called out in the crowd. Can you fucking believe we used to date that bitch? No. It couldn't be who Crow thought it was. It ran through the crowds, passing through them like mist to get closer to the source. It couldn't be him. Not Joe. Sure enough, Joe held Ezzy tight in his arms as they both watched the horror show, both looking giddy as ever. They kissed, groping each other as the woman they claimed to both love was murdered before them, turning into a giant that towered behind them now. How badly Crow wanted to reach out and smash their heads together. How badly she wanted to tear this whole place down. Crow screamed at the top of its lungs as the scenery changed around them. The drumming returned, but it was distant, barely noticeable over the screams. Crow flailed about, smashing its gigantic hands into the rock around it, sending chunks into the air. It didn't stop for a good long while, not until its throat was raw and its hands pulled back from the rock wall with blood oozing between her fingers. Take me back. Sable, that's not how it... Take me back. Crow was pressing its body against the woman's form, looking down at her with 4 glowing red eyes. I want to crack their skulls open. You wanted me to get revenge, right? Let me at them. Despite her company, the woman in black remained calm, taking a few small steps back from Crow. That's not how it works, Sable. She began shaking her hair. What you saw was in the past, while you were being turned into... this. Crow began to relax. You can still get back at them, though. You just have to go about it in a more roundabout way. Her eyes moved to an opening in the rock wall. A cave? And your revenge lies in there. What's in there? The woman in black shrugged, leaning against the wall. I'm not allowed in there, so I don't know exactly. My master, however, knows for a fact that in there lies a way to cut power from the people who sent you here. You would make it impossible for them to send any more poor young people here, to be turned into beasts or killed. She smiled. My master has been taking out places like this all over the globe. This is the last place of power for them. Destroy what's in there and you, my friend, just got revenge on them. They'll grow weak and be wiped away from the face of reality for good. No one will ever harm you, ever again. There was a pause. So what do you say, Sable? Ready to get back at them? Stop calling me Sable, Crow growled, moving towards the opening of the cave, staring into the darkness. Sable died a long time ago. I'm not doing this for me, for you, for anyone out there. I'm doing this for her. She didn't get a chance to fight back. Crow began entering the cave, not bothering to look back as it continued. When I'm done, I want you to leave me alone. I want to be left in peace. The woman in black waited for Crow to fully disappear into the cave before chuckling. Don't worry, darling. There won't be anything left of you or anyone to bother. Not anymore. Sable was written and narrated by me, Lane Lloyd. If you'd like to follow my antics, you can always find me on Twitter at @the_Lane Lloyd. That's LANELLOID. If you'd like to stay up to date on the show and get some behind-the-scene factoids, you can now follow Sable directly. It only took us, 8 episodes to finally make a Twitter for the show? Just go to @SablePod, that's SABLEPOD, for everything Sable. Sable's theme, Unfamiliar Places, was written and performed by Alex Langford and Trevor Eilers, and a link to the song is in the show notes for this episode. Guys, do me a favor this week and share Sable with all your friends, your family, your enemies, that guy you keep locked up in your basement, whoever it is, just share the show with them. You can also subscribe and leave the show a rating to further increase your odds of not dying in a freak clown accident. As always, we're on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever else you might listen to podcasts. And that just about does it for this episode of Sable. Tune in next week for Season 1's epic conclusion. This is Lane Lloyd wishing you a good night, and just to remind you, that's not the dog barking outside your door. Good night.